The morning sun streamed through the wide clubhouse windows, bouncing off the polished floors and highlighting every detail of the pristine suburban neighborhood outside. Rows of neatly trimmed hedges lined the sidewalks, identical mailboxes stood in perfect symmetry, and the air smelled faintly of overwatered lawns and freshly brewed coffee. Inside, the members of the Greenfield Estates Homeowners Association gathered around a glossy oak table, chattering about minor neighborhood infractions. Trash cans left out too long, lawns an inch too tall, fences painted the wrong shade of white. The world outside was perfect, or so they believed. John sat near the end of the table, fidgeting with a small potted plant he'd brought with him. The roots had already begun poking through the bottom of the pot, twisting like restless snakes. He glanced around the room. Dozens of faces he'd known for years, neighbors who smiled politely when passing him but rolled their eyes the moment he turned away. He cleared his throat once softly. No one looked up. He tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me," he said. The chatter faded. "Before we move to the next topic, I need to address something serious about the plants you approved for the entrance landscaping project." Across from him, Mrs. Grant, the HOA president, leaned back in her chair. Her blonde bob didn't move an inch, as if her hair obeyed the same strict neighborhood rules she enforced. "Ah, yes," she said in her polished, condescending tone. "The greensprawl ivy, wasn't it? The landscapers said it's low maintenance and fast-growing, exactly what we want." John shook his head. "That's the problem. It's too fast-growing. It's not a decorative ivy. It's an invasive hybrid engineered to spread aggressively. It doesn't stop at fences or property lines. It climbs, it burrows, and it chokes out every other plant around it. I've seen what it can do." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone laughed quietly. Mrs. Grant raised an eyebrow. "John, are you saying our landscapers, a licensed, well-reviewed company, don't know what they're planting?" "I'm saying they don't care," John replied, his voice firm now. "They want results fast. This plant looks beautiful at first, but give it a few weeks and you'll lose control. It'll overtake the flower beds, the lawns, even crawl under siding. Once it takes root, you can't dig it out. You'll need to burn it." A man in a golf polo snorted. "Burn it? What is this, a horror movie? It's just ivy, John." Laughter filled the room. The kind that wasn't cruel in tone, but sharp enough to sting. John clenched his jaw, remembering the same tone they used when he warned them about overwatering lawns and the rising mold problem in the storm drains. He'd been right then, too, but they never remembered that part. He lifted the small pot and set it in the center of the table. "I brought proof," he said. "This sample came from a test patch I grew behind my shed 2 weeks ago. I cut it back every morning, but it still keeps spreading. Watch." He pulled out a pocket knife and sliced through one of the vines. A few members gasped at the faint squirming movement beneath the green skin, like the plant itself was alive in ways it shouldn't be. The severed stem oozed a thin, sticky sap that clung to his knife. He wiped it with a rag that hissed faintly when the sap touched the fabric. "See that?" he said, holding up the rag. "It secretes a chemical compound that suppresses other plant growth. It kills competition. If you let it near the entrance, it'll reach the sidewalks within a month." Mrs. Grant stared at him, unimpressed. "John, you've always had a flair for drama. Last year you said the new sprinkler schedule would flood the park. It didn't." John's patience snapped. "It did for 3 days straight. You just installed new drains and pretended it never happened." The room went quiet. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Mrs. Grant smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that said she enjoyed holding power over moments like this. "Well, we appreciate your enthusiasm for gardening truly, but the board has already voted. The vines are part of the beautification project, and the landscapers start tomorrow morning." "You're making a mistake," John said, standing up. "Once this takes root, it'll be too late to stop. It doesn't care about rules, fences, or meeting minutes." Mrs. Grant waved a dismissive hand. "Thank you for your input, John. Maybe you can volunteer for the next pruning committee, if it worries you so much." The laughter returned, louder this time, feeding off each other's smug confidence. Someone muttered, "He's always so paranoid," while another whispered, "Probably just jealous he didn't think of it first." John felt heat rise in his chest. He wanted to shout, to make them see reason, but he knew it was pointless. They didn't listen to warnings. They only reacted to disasters. He looked at Mrs. Grant one last time. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, his tone steady and cold. "You think you can control everything in this neighborhood, but you can't control nature." He turned and walked out of the room. The laughter faded behind him, replaced by the distant buzz of sprinklers and the chirping of birds outside. The air outside felt too still, too clean, as if the world was holding its breath. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment, staring at the row of decorative planters lined up near the clubhouse entrance. Each one already had a small cutting of the greensprawl ivy waiting to be planted. The vines shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a strange, almost metallic green, and tiny roots pressed against the plastic pots, as though impatient to be free. A landscaper across the lot waved cheerfully at him. "Hey, Mr. Thompson! You ready to see this place get a makeover?" John didn't answer. He simply stared at the vines, noticing how one tendril had already slipped out of its pot and curled around the handle of a nearby shovel. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat. He turned and walked home, each step heavier than the last. The laughter from the clubhouse echoed faintly behind him, but it was swallowed quickly by the soft rustle of leaves carried on the breeze. That night, long after the meeting had ended and the neighborhood lights dimmed, John couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out across the rows of perfect lawns. The entrance sign glowed faintly in the moonlight, and in front of it, the landscaper's truck still sat with the potted vines inside. He thought he saw movement, a faint slither of green spilling over the truck bed and sinking into the soil. He blinked. It was gone. But the next morning, as the sun rose, he would see the truth. The first vines had already taken root, their tendrils stretching across the ground like living veins, creeping toward every house in Greenfield Estates. And in the empty clubhouse, the small plant John had left behind on the table twitched again, its roots pushing deeper into the carpet as if it were tasting the air, waiting to spread. 2 months later, the neighborhood that once prided itself on symmetry and control looked like something out of a fever dream. Greenfield Estates, the model of suburban perfection, was now unrecognizable. The once straight sidewalks were cracked and swallowed by tangled vines. Lawns that had been trimmed to regulation height were buried beneath a thick, living carpet of green that shimmered faintly, as if breathing. The sound of cicadas and rustling leaves drowned out everything else, even the faint hum of power lines that still struggled against the weight of creeping foliage. John stood at the edge of his property, staring at the devastation beyond his trench. His home was one of the only ones still visible from the street, though street was hardly the right word anymore. The asphalt was fractured, bulging where roots had burst through, and cars were entombed beneath layers of ivy, their outlines just barely visible. The HOA's once gleaming white sign, "Greenfield Estates a perfect community," was now nothing but a mossy mound, the letters half, consumed by thick tendrils. He could still hear their laughter sometimes, echoing in his mind from that meeting 2 months ago. They'd mocked him, rolled their eyes, dismissed every word of warning. He'd watched them plant the vines himself, smiling for photos with the landscapers as if they were unveiling a monument. The plants had spread faster than even he imagined. Within a week, they had reached the sidewalks. Within 2, they'd begun crawling up porch columns. Then, almost overnight, they covered entire homes. Now, the air smelled of sap and decay, a sickly sweetness that clung to everything. The vines pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, but if you looked long enough, you could see it a rhythm, a pattern, as though they shared a single heartbeat. He tightened his grip on the machete. It wasn't much use, not really. Cutting them back only made them grow faster. He'd learned that after the first week, but the blade was comforting in his hand, a reminder that he still had some control, even if it was an illusion. In the distance, a sound broke through the eerie calm, a desperate voice, muffled by leaves. "Help, please, someone!" John's head snapped toward the noise. It came from the direction of the old clubhouse. He hesitated, then began walking, the machete swinging lightly at his side. The ground beneath his boots was soft, spongy alive. Vines recoiled slightly with each step, but only just. They were no longer afraid of him, they were curious. As he walked, he passed what used to be the Smith's house. The doorframe was visible for a moment before collapsing under the weight of green growth. Something inside moved, something that had once been human but was now barely recognizable, entangled in a cocoon of roots that pulsed in sync with the vines around it. He looked away quickly. The screams came again, sharper this time. At the clubhouse, the transformation was almost complete. The roof had caved in under the weight of growth, and the walls were now ribbed with vine-covered beams. The air was humid and thick. Inside, Mrs. Grant's voice echoed, trembling with disbelief. "They won't stop growing. We tried burning them, cutting them." John stepped through the remains of the doorway. The vines parted slightly, making room for him as if recognizing him. Mrs. Grant spun around, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her perfect hair was gone, replaced by tangles of leaves that clung to her scalp. "John, you have to help us?" she gasped. "It's everywhere. We can't even leave." "It grows over the cars, the doors." He stared at her for a long moment, saying nothing. Behind her, 2 other board members were trying to pry open a window, but the vines slammed it shut again, the sound echoing like a gunshot. John finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, almost gentle. "You remember what I said at that meeting?" Mrs. Grant's breath hitched. "Please. I didn't know." "You laughed," he said simply. "All of you did." He stepped closer. The vines slithered along the floor, reaching for him, but never touching. They moved around his feet like obedient pets. "I tried to stop it," he continued, looking at the pulsating walls. "I tried to warn you, but you didn't listen. And now, it's listening to me." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" As if in answer, the vines around her tightened. She screamed, trying to pull away, but they wrapped around her legs, her arms, her mouth. John didn't move. He simply watched. The vines covered her completely in seconds, leaving behind only the faint outline of her face beneath the green. The room fell silent again except for the rustling of leaves. He walked through the remains of the clubhouse, past the walls that now pulsed with veins of glowing sap. Each throb illuminated the faces of those who had once ruled the neighborhood with smug authority. Now they were nothing but shadows beneath the green, silent and still. Outside, the world was no longer recognizable as a suburb. It looked like a jungle that had swallowed civilization whole. Mailboxes were wrapped in thick cords of ivy. Street lamps glowed faintly beneath translucent vines. The air buzzed with life, mosquitoes, beetles, birds that hadn't been there before. The ecosystem had adapted quickly. The plants were spreading beyond Greenfield now, crawling past the main road and toward the nearby town. He climbed the small hill near his home, the highest point in the neighborhood. From there, he could see the full extent of it, the endless green stretching in every direction, the faint outlines of roofs and cars beneath it. A slow, deep rumble echoed through the ground. Not mechanical but organic, as if the earth itself was alive. He exhaled slowly. "You should have listened," he said to no one in particular. Then something new caught his eye. Near the center of the town, where the vines were thickest, massive flowers were blooming. Huge, luminous blossoms that opened with a hiss, releasing a shimmering mist into the air. The spores caught the sunlight, glowing softly like dust motes, drifting upward. It was beautiful in a haunting, unnatural way. He knew what it meant. The plants weren't just spreading, they were reproducing. Soon the wind would carry their spores miles away, and Greenfield Estates would only be the beginning. Behind him, a faint rustle made him turn. A figure stumbled out of the undergrowth. Mr. Collins, one of the last remaining neighbors. His clothes were torn, and his skin was streaked with green veins. "John," he croaked, "you have to stop it." John looked at him, expression unreadable. "Stop it. You can't stop something that's already taken root. You can only survive it." "Mr." Collins tried to speak again, but before he could, a vine shot up from the ground and wrapped around his throat. His scream was short, cut off as the plant pulled him back into the greenery. John didn't flinch. He just stared at the horizon, watching the spores drift higher and higher into the orange evening sky. The setting sun bathed everything in a sickly gold glow, and the vines shimmered like liquid metal. He sheathed his machete, realizing he didn't need it anymore. This was nature's way of reclaiming what people thought they owned. The perfect lawns, the neat fences, the endless rules, they were meaningless now. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Maybe the neighboring town had noticed. Maybe they'd try to contain it. But it was too late. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sap and earth, and John smiled faintly. "They mocked me," he whispered. "Now they'll all learn." He turned back toward his house as the vines crept closer, their movement slow but certain. The world had changed forever, and he no longer felt anger, only a strange, quiet satisfaction as the green tide continued to spread, swallowing everything it touched.